The Carlton estate was no ordinary venue. For generations, it had been the crown jewel of the Granger family's wealth and influence, a sprawling mansion of white stone, sweeping staircases, and vaulted ceilings painted with gilded angels. On this day, it gleamed brighter than ever before. Sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, casting jeweled rays across the grand hall. Hundreds of guests, draped in silks, sat in anticipation, their whispers echoing like restless birds. It was the wedding of the year. No, the wedding of the decade. Elliot Granger, the steel-eyed tycoon whose name commanded respect in every boardroom, was giving away his only daughter. Reporters waited outside the gates, desperate for a glimpse of the extravagance within. Politicians, celebrities, industrial magnates, all had secured invitations, for being seen at Elliot's event meant more than fashion, it meant status. The hall itself was a spectacle. Crystal chandeliers rained diamonds of light upon tables laden with gold-trimmed programs. The air smelled of roses, orchids, and jasmine, shipped in from across oceans. Each pew was lined with ivory silk, and a scarlet carpet rolled proudly toward the altar, where a towering arch of blossoms framed the priest's pulpit. Amidst the grandeur, Elliot stood at the front, tall, broad-shouldered, the embodiment of command. His tuxedo was custom-stitched in Italy, his cufflinks carved from platinum. At 63, his hair had grayed, but his presence carried the weight of empires. People whispered not only of his wealth, but his iron will, the way he could crush rivals with a glance, seal billion-dollar contracts with a handshake. Today, however, the steel in his eyes softened. His daughter was radiant, and this marriage symbolized more than love, it was the alliance of two powerful dynasties. He adjusted his tuxedo as an attendant whispered, "Everything is in order, sir." Elliot gave a curt nod, slipping a folded white handkerchief into his breast pocket. It was embroidered with his initials, neat and flawless, the sort of detail he never overlooked. To him, it was merely a symbol of refinement, an accessory that spoke of class and dignity. Little did he know, that harmless square of cloth carried more danger than all his enemies combined. The orchestra began to play, their instruments weaving a melody that seemed to carry heaven itself into the hall. Guests leaned forward, fanning themselves with the programs, murmuring compliments on the bride's gown, the floral arrangements, the shimmering jewelry. A soft hum of admiration filled the air. Yet, not all eyes were dazzled. At the far end of the hall, near the last pew, Maya sat quietly, her small figure nearly swallowed by the grandeur around her. At 12 years old, she was unlike the other children of the wealthy. Adopted into the Granger family after a tragedy Elliot rarely spoke of, she lived in a world of silk curtains and marble staircases but never quite belonged to it. While others giggled and whispered, Maya observed. Her sharp brown eyes missed nothing, the subtle glances between guests, the nervous twitch of the bride's mother, the way Elliot's hand lingered near his pocket. To any adult in the room, the handkerchief was invisible, a mere accessory. But Maya's gaze lingered on it. She remembered a night not long ago when she had wandered the corridors past bedtime. From behind a half-closed door, she had seen someone holding a similar piece of white cloth. A vial of liquid was poured onto it, releasing a sharp, acrid scent that stung her nose even from a distance. The cloth had been folded quickly, tucked away, and she had fled before being noticed. She hadn't understood it fully then, but the memory gnawed at her. Now, as she saw her father standing proudly before the altar, that same embroidered square peeking from his pocket, her stomach tightened. A silent alarm rang in her chest. The music swelled, but all she could hear was the echo of that strange liquid soaking into fabric. The world around her glittered with wealth and laughter, but Maya felt a shadow creeping closer with each passing moment. Her small hands tightened in her lap. She wanted to run to Elliot, to grab the handkerchief and fling it away, but she dared not disrupt the most important day of his life. What if she was wrong? What if her memory had played tricks on her? She imagined the laughter of the guests, the embarrassment she would bring to her father if she cried out with no proof. Yet deep down, she knew. Children often see what adults choose to ignore. And Maya saw danger. As the ceremony unfolded, every detail seemed magnified. The bride, dazzling in white lace and diamonds, smiled with flawless grace, but her eyes, when they flickered toward Elliot's pocket, gleamed with something that unsettled Maya. The bride's family, seated proudly in the front, leaned forward just a little too eagerly, their faces tense beneath their smiles. Even the servants carrying trays of champagne seemed restless, their steps hurried, their eyes downcast. Maya's heartbeat thundered in her ears. She tried to calm herself, to look away, to remind herself she was just a child in a world too big for her voice. But then she saw it, Elliot's hand brushing against the handkerchief, tugging it ever so slightly as he adjusted his suit. Her breath caught in her throat. The orchestra rose toward its crescendo, the priest lifting his hands to speak the sacred vows. The guests leaned forward, eager for the grand moment. For them, it was a scene of beauty, wealth, and promise. But for Maya, it was the slow tightening of a noose. She clutched the pew, her nails biting into the wood, torn between silence and truth. If she stayed quiet, her father's life might be measured in minutes. If she spoke, she risked being mocked, scolded, even cast aside. The hall shimmered with light and music, but within Maya's chest, a storm raged. And as Elliot's hand drifted once more toward the pocket that held the white square of death, Maya realized she was standing at the edge of a choice that could change everything. Maya shifted uneasily in her seat as the orchestra played its gentle prelude. To anyone watching, she was just a quiet 12-year-old, sitting demurely in her silk dress, hands folded neatly in her lap. But inside, her mind was anything but still. Every detail around her screamed perfection, the gleaming chandeliers, the perfume of imported flowers, the glimmering jewels on women's throats, but all of it blurred for Maya. Her attention was fixed on one small, dangerous detail, the handkerchief tucked neatly into Elliot Granger's pocket. It seemed harmless enough to everyone else. Guests admired Elliot's composure, noting the crisp elegance of his tuxedo and the subtle shine of his accessories. He looked every bit the image of power and refinement. But Maya couldn't forget what she had seen. It had been just a week before the wedding. She remembered sneaking down the West Wing corridor long after she was supposed to be in bed. The halls of the Carlton estate were vast, echoing with silence at night, and Maya often wondered when she couldn't sleep. That evening, she had followed the glow of lamplight seeping through a half-open door. Inside, voices murmured, low, conspiratorial. She had leaned closer, her small fingers gripping the carved wood of the doorframe. Through the crack, she saw a figure hunched over a table. The flicker of lamplight glinted off a small glass vial. With careful hands, the person poured a strange, pale liquid onto a folded square of fabric. The cloth hissed faintly, the liquid seeping into its threads, leaving behind a faint, acrid smell. Maya had covered her nose, her heart pounding. She didn't fully understand what she was seeing, but she knew instinctively it was wrong. The fabric was folded carefully, tucked away, and the voices grew hushed as footsteps approached the door. Terrified of being caught, Maya fled back to her room, her heart hammering in her chest. That night, she lay awake staring at the ceiling, the sharp smell lingering in her imagination. She wanted to tell someone, her nanny, perhaps, or even Elliot himself, but the thought of being dismissed or punished for snooping kept her silent. After all, she was just a child in a world ruled by adults who valued power and appearances above all else. Now, in the grand hall of the wedding, her worst fears returned. The handkerchief she had seen that night, she was certain it was the very one her father carried today. It peeked out innocently from his pocket, white and crisp, the embroidered initials gleaming under the chandeliers. No one else noticed, no one else cared, but to Maya it might as well have been a dagger aimed at her father's heart. Her gaze darted to the bride. The young woman glowed in her lace gown, her smile poised and flawless. Guests whispered about her beauty, her elegance, the fortune this union represented. But Maya's sharp eyes caught something others missed. The bride's gaze flickered toward Elliot's pocket more than once, too quick for the distracted guests to notice, but not quick enough to escape Maya's watchfulness. A cold shiver ran down her spine. She knows. Maya tried to reason with herself. Maybe she was wrong. Maybe her imagination was running wild, weaving shadows where none existed. She told herself she was being foolish, that the cloth was only fabric, that the bride's glances were nothing more than nerves. But the memory of that acrid scent clung stubbornly to her mind. She glanced at the front rows, where the bride's family sat proudly. Their posture was rigid, their smiles wide but brittle. The mother's hands twisted her pearl necklace again and again, her eyes darting whenever Elliot moved. The father's jaw was set too firmly, his hand gripping his cane with white knuckles. They looked less like a family celebrating their daughter's marriage and more like conspirators waiting for a trap to be sprung. The orchestra swelled, and the priest cleared his throat. Guests leaned forward, expectant, their laughter and whispers dying into reverent silence. Elliot stood tall, radiating authority, adjusting his tuxedo with one hand. That hand brushed the edge of his pocket, where the folded square waited. Maya felt her heart skip a beat. Her palms grew damp. She dug her fingernails into the soft silk of her dress. Every instinct screamed at her to run forward, to grab his hand, to shout the truth. But the weight of the crowd pressed down on her. She could already hear the laughter, the scolding voices. Silly child, don't ruin the ceremony. Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't shame your father in front of the world. But shame was nothing compared to the terror gnawing inside her. She thought of Elliot, the man who had adopted her, who had given her a life of comfort she had never dreamed of, who, despite his stern exterior, had shown her moments of quiet kindness. She remembered the nights he read to her in his study, the way his large hand rested protectively on her shoulder when they crossed busy streets, the rare but precious moments when he smiled and called her his brave girl. Could she watch him die before her eyes, all because she was afraid to speak? Maya looked around the hall again, desperate for some ally, someone who might see what she saw. But the guests were entranced by the ceremony, their eyes shining with admiration, blind to the danger. Servants moved quietly along the edges, carrying trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres, but none looked up. She was alone. The music deepened, the vows approached. Elliot's chest swelled with pride, his eyes fixed on the priest. His hand moved once more toward his pocket. Maya's breath hitched sharply, her body trembling. The walls of the grand hall seemed to close in around her. The chandeliers above glared like watchful eyes, the murmurs of the crowd sounded like distant thunder. Every second stretched into eternity. Maya's throat ached with the words she longed to shout, but fear held her tongue. And yet, in the midst of that fear, something else stirred, something stronger. A memory of her late mother, faint and fleeting, whispering to her that courage was not the absence of fear but the will to act despite it. Her heart hammered, her knees trembled, but her resolve hardened. She could not stay silent. Maya knew, with the certainty only a child's pure instinct could bring, that if she did not speak, her father's life would end today. And so, as the ceremony drew closer to its climactic moment, as the orchestra swelled and Elliot's hand grazed the edge of the poisoned square, Maya prepared herself. Her body tensed, her lips parted, her voice gathering strength she didn't know she had. The storm inside her was about to break. The air inside the Carlton estate grew thick with expectation. The orchestra swelled, violins quivering with elegance, the priest's voice rising as he prepared to pronounce the sacred vows. The guests, dressed in satin and velvet, leaned forward, faces glowing with admiration for the spectacle before them. To them, this was a fairy tale. A union of two dynasties. The very embodiment of power and love. But for Maya, seated at the back of the hall, it felt like watching a noose tighten around her father's neck. Her gaze never left Elliot's breast pocket. The white handkerchief gleamed there, innocent to everyone else, deadly to her. And then it happened, slowly, almost casually, Elliot's hand brushed against it. A small, thoughtless gesture, as if he meant to pull it out to dab at his brow. Maya's breath stopped. The room seemed to shrink around her, the chandeliers above tilting, the music warping into something distorted and sinister. In that moment, she felt utterly alone, an invisible child in a hall of giants. But then she remembered the sharp, acrid smell that night. The glass vial. The fabric folding. The faint hiss. It was real. The danger was real. And her father was seconds away from death. Her body trembled violently. Her lips parted, but no sound came. She could already hear the imagined jeers, "Sit down, girl. You're ruining the wedding. Don't embarrass your father." But then she thought of Elliot, not the powerful tycoon everyone admired, but the man who had once carried her on his shoulders in the garden, who had tucked her into bed on stormy nights, who, despite his sternness, had always looked at her with something she rarely saw in anyone else: protection. If she stayed silent, she would lose him forever. The priest lifted his hands. And now, let these two be bound in eternal union. Elliot's hand moved again, tugging at the handkerchief. And Maya broke. Her small body shot upward from the pew, her voice slicing through the orchestra, through the priest's blessing, through the heavy silence of power and expectation. "Stop. Dad. The handkerchief is poisoned." The words rang like a bell struck in the heart of the cathedral. For a moment, there was nothing, no music, no whispers, no breath. The world froze. The violinist's bow screeched off key, the cellos groaned into silence. Hundreds of faces turned at once, eyes wide, mouths agape. Elliot froze mid-gesture, the white fabric dangling between his fingers. His eyes narrowed, confusion and disbelief flashing across his face. Gasps rippled like thunder through the crowd. A woman dropped her fan with a clatter. Champagne glasses trembled in servants' hands. The bride's smile faltered, her eyes flashing wide before she quickly composed herself. But Maya had seen it, that brief flicker of panic. "Dad." Maya's voice rang again, louder now, stronger, her small fists clenched at her sides. "Don't touch it. Please, it will kill you." The hall erupted. "What is this nonsense?" a guest hissed. "Poison," another scoffed, though his laugh carried no mirth. A nervous murmur rose among the guests, swelling louder with every passing second. The words, poison, handkerchief, child's scream, spread like wildfire through the glittering hall. Elliot's hand shook. He looked from the white square in his grasp to his daughter's trembling form at the back of the hall. Her eyes, wide with terror, locked onto his, and in them he saw no mischief, no childish prank, only raw, desperate truth. The priest stammered, "Sir, perhaps we should." But Elliot silenced him with a raised hand, his gaze still locked on Maya. "Poison," he murmured, his voice low, almost to himself. The bride's mother quickly rose, her pearls jangling against her dress. "She's a child," she exclaimed, forcing a laugh that rang hollow. "Children say the silliest things. Pay her no mind." But her voice wavered, her eyes darting nervously toward the handkerchief. Maya stumbled forward, her voice breaking but fierce. "I saw it. I saw them poison it last night." The hall convulsed with chaos. Some guests gasped audibly, clutching pearls and handkerchiefs. Others laughed nervously, unwilling to believe such horror could intrude upon so beautiful an occasion. Servants froze like statues, trays shaking in their hands. Elliot's face hardened. His eyes, steel gray and commanding, scanned the bride's family. Their smiles had vanished, their faces pale, their hands trembling ever so slightly. The bride herself had turned ghostly white. She forced a trembling laugh, clutching her gown. "Surely this is madness," she said softly. "Elliot, please, it's just a handkerchief." But her voice cracked at the end, betraying her fear. Elliot's chest rose and fell as he held the cloth aloft. His mind churned with disbelief, anger, and a creeping dread. Could this be true? That such treachery could lie hidden within the folds of a simple square? That the union he had celebrated as his greatest triumph was built on betrayal? Maya, he said, his voice booming across the hall, come here. The girl hesitated, her legs trembling, but then she broke into a run. Her footsteps echoed loudly in the stunned silence as she rushed down the scarlet carpet, past rows of gawking guests, past faces twisted in shock and scorn. She stopped before her father, her small chest heaving, tears glistening in her eyes. Please, she whispered hoarsely, staring at the handkerchief. Don't use it. It's poisoned. I swear it, Dad. I saw them do it. The crowd murmured, a restless sea of disbelief and suspicion. Some guests rose to leave, others craned their necks for a better view. The orchestra sat frozen, instruments slack in their hands. Elliot stared at his daughter for a long, silent moment. Her words echoed inside him, louder than the chaos around them. He could hear the sincerity in her trembling voice, see the raw terror in her eyes. And in that instant, Elliot Granger, the tycoon who had never bowed to anyone, felt a chill crawl up his spine. The handkerchief, still resting in his hand, no longer looked like a symbol of elegance. It looked like death. He dropped it. The fabric fluttered to the floor in slow motion, landing soundlessly on the marble tiles. And with that simple act, the illusion of perfection shattered. The crowd erupted into a storm of panic, suspicion, and fear. Voices overlapped in a cacophony. Was it true? Who poisoned it? Could this be a plot? The bride stumbled backward, her composure cracking, tears welling in her eyes. The bride's father barked angrily at a servant, demanding order, but his trembling voice betrayed him. Elliot bent down, staring at the fallen handkerchief as if it were a venomous snake. Then slowly, he lifted his gaze back to the crowd, his jaw set, his eyes blazing with fury. And in the center of it all, Maya stood small and trembling, her voice the only beacon of truth that had pierced the golden facade. The hall of the Carlton estate, which moments ago shimmered with music and laughter, now trembled under the weight of panic. The fallen handkerchief lay in the center of the scarlet carpet, its white folds gleaming against the marble floor like a sinister relic. All eyes were on it, and on Elliot Granger, who stood frozen, his hand clenched into a trembling fist. The silence broke like glass. Poison, a woman gasped from the front row, clutching her pearls. This is absurd, a man barked, though his voice wavered. Whispers roared into shouts, the crowd shifting uneasily, a ripple of expensive gowns and tailored suits. The orchestra abandoned their instruments, bowing out awkwardly as murmurs surged. The bride's mother leapt to her feet, her pearls rattling against her chest. This is ridiculous, she cried, her laughter shrill and forced. A child's outburst, nothing more. Can we please continue the ceremony? But her face betrayed her, her lips quivered, her eyes darted nervously toward the discarded cloth. Maya, standing small but unyielding at the altar, raised her chin. Her voice shook but rang clear, rising above the noise. I saw it. I saw them pour something on it. Last night. The guests erupted again, some gasping, others scoffing, some even edging toward the exits. Fear slithered through the hall. The word poison clung to the air like smoke, impossible to ignore. Elliot bent down and lifted the handkerchief gingerly, as though it might strike. His eyes, sharp as steel, swept across the bride's family. Who gave me this? His voice was low but thunderous, carrying the weight of command. The bride's father, Lord Davencrest, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His jaw clenched, his knuckles white as he gripped his cane. It was a gift, he said carefully. From the family. A gesture of goodwill. Goodwill. Elliot snarled, holding the handkerchief aloft like evidence of a crime. This is no gift. This is treachery. Gasps filled the room. The bride staggered forward, her face pale as porcelain. Elliot, please, this is madness, she pleaded, her voice trembling. Do you think I would ever allow harm to come to you? I love you. But her voice cracked, and her eyes betrayed her terror. She reached out a trembling hand, but Elliot stepped back, his gaze piercing. Love? His laugh was cold, humorless. If this is love, it wears poison in its folds. The tension snapped like a whip. Guests surged into chaos, some shouting accusations, others demanding answers. The wealthy elite, so composed a moment ago, now looked like frightened children. A noblewoman fainted, collapsing into her husband's arms. Servants hovered at the edges, their trays abandoned, unsure whether to flee or freeze. Amid the uproar, Elliot's most trusted advisor, Mr. Hargrave, strode forward. His face was stern, his voice steady. "Sir, allow me," he said, taking the handkerchief. He reached into his coat pocket and drew out a small vial, a chemist's reagent, one he carried for his own curiosities. He dripped a single drop onto the cloth. The effect was immediate. The pristine white square darkened, curling at the edges. A faint, acrid smoke hissed upward, filling the hall with a sharp, stinging odor. The crowd recoiled in horror. "It's true," someone cried. "Poison," another shouted. Panic erupted. Guests stumbled over one another, pushing toward the doors. The bride's mother screamed, the sound piercing above the chaos. The bride herself fell to her knees, her hands covering her face. Elliot's fury ignited. He turned on Lord Davencrest, his eyes blazing. "You would poison me on my daughter's wedding day? In front of my guests? In front of the world?" Davencrest's composure shattered. His voice shook as he stammered, I know nothing of this. It must be a mistake." But Elliot cut him off, his voice booming. "A mistake? Do not insult me. My child saw the truth before any of us. Do you think me a fool?" The crowd hushed for a moment, all eyes swinging to Maya. She stood trembling but resolute, her small hands clenched into fists. Her words had torn through the glittering illusion, exposing rot beneath the gold. For a long moment, Elliot simply stared at her. His daughter. The one voice brave enough to shatter the silence. The hall spun with chaos, but she was steady. She was the only one who had spoken when everyone else cowered. He turned back to the Davencrests, his voice like a blade. "This marriage is over. Whatever alliance I thought to forge here is broken. You brought treachery into my house, and you will answer for it." The bride sobbed, reaching toward him, but Elliot brushed past her. His fury was no longer tempered by love or diplomacy. He towered over the Davencrests, his presence suffocating, his voice echoing against the marble walls. "Guards," he bellowed. Uniformed men appeared from the corners of the hall, their boots striking the floor like thunder. The Davencrests flinched, their faces pale. "Escort them from my estate," Elliot ordered. "Let the world know them for what they are." The bride's mother shrieked in protest. The bride wept uncontrollably. Lord Davencrest tried to speak, but his words drowned beneath the uproar of guests and the heavy footsteps of the guards. Within moments, the once proud family was being dragged from the hall, their screams echoing in disgrace. The guests murmured furiously, their voices a tangled web of shock and intrigue. Some whispered of scandal, others of attempted murder. Servants hurried to calm them, but no one could silence the storm. In the eye of that storm stood Elliot and Maya. Elliot's chest heaved, his fury slowly giving way to something else, something deeper, more fragile. He looked down at his daughter, who stood trembling but proud, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "You," his voice cracked slightly, the anger softening. "You saved me." Maya blinked, her throat too tight to speak. For a moment, she feared he might scold her for ruining the ceremony, for speaking out of turn. But instead, he bent down and took her small hand in his, holding it firmly. The hall grew quieter. Guests watched with wide eyes, whispers fading into silence. They had come expecting to witness the union of dynasties, but instead, they were seeing something else entirely, a father's life saved by the courage of a child. Elliot lifted Maya's hand for all to see. It was not wealth, nor power, nor alliances that saved me today, he declared. His voice boomed, carrying to every corner of the hall. It was the truth spoken by my daughter. Remember this, a single voice, brave and honest, can unmask the greatest of deceits. The hall thundered with applause, hesitant at first, then roaring, as if the crowd sought redemption for their silence. And though scandal still hung in the air, though whispers of betrayal would spread across the city by dawn, one truth stood unshaken: Maya had changed everything. The grand hall of the Carlton estate was no longer a place of celebration. The chandeliers still glistened above, but their golden light seemed colder now, casting long shadows over the scarlet carpet where the poisoned handkerchief had been exposed. What had been planned as a union of two powerful families was now a scene of disgrace, betrayal, and truth revealed. The Davencrests had been escorted out in humiliation, their screams of protest echoing faintly through the marble corridors as the heavy doors slammed shut behind them. Guests lingered uneasily, their conversations hushed, their eyes darting between Elliot Granger and his young daughter Maya, as though uncertain of what they had just witnessed. For a long moment, Elliot said nothing. He stood tall, his jaw set, his mind storming. His chest rose and fell heavily, the weight of what had nearly transpired pressing down upon him. His fortune, his future, his very life, had it not been for Maya, all of it could have ended on that very day. He looked down at her now. Maya stood beside him, her small frame almost swallowed by the grandeur of the hall, yet she carried herself with a quiet strength that made her appear taller than anyone else in the room. Her eyes, wide, shimmering with both fear and courage, met his, and for the first time in years, Elliot felt a sharp ache in his chest. He had built his empire on stone and steel, on contracts and cunning, but here was something far stronger, the unshakable bond of blood, of love, of truth. Slowly, Elliot knelt so that he was eye level with his daughter. The hall grew silent, the rustling gowns and murmuring voices fading into nothing. Everyone leaned in, waiting to hear what the Tycoon would say. "Maya," he said softly, his voice uncharacteristically fragile, "you saved me today. You saved more than my life, you saved my soul from blindness." Maya's lips trembled. I didn't mean to ruin the wedding, Papa," she whispered. "But I couldn't let them hurt you. I saw what they did, and I was so afraid you wouldn't believe me." Elliot reached out and cupped her face gently, his hands large and calloused against her soft skin. "Ruin the wedding? No, my child, you saved it from becoming my funeral. And you gave me something far greater than an alliance with vipers, you gave me truth." Tears welled in Maya's eyes, spilling down her cheeks. For so long, she had felt like a small voice drowned out by the roar of wealth and politics. But today, her voice had changed the fate of everyone in the room. Elliot rose to his feet and turned to face the crowd, still holding Maya's hand firmly. His presence commanded silence. "My friends, my colleagues," he said, his voice carrying across the hall. "You came today to witness a marriage that was meant to strengthen power. But instead, you witnessed treachery. What was hidden has been revealed, and it was revealed not by a court, not by my wealth, but by the courage of this child." The guests shifted uncomfortably, their faces a mixture of shame and awe. Some avoided his gaze, remembering how quickly they had dismissed Maya's cries as childish interruption. Others nodded solemnly, realizing the weight of her bravery. "Let this be a lesson to all of us," Elliot continued, his voice booming with conviction. "We spend our lives building empires, guarding fortunes, and chasing power. But none of it means anything if we cannot see the truth that stands before us, even when it comes from the lips of the smallest among us. My daughter reminded me today that honesty, no matter how inconvenient, is the foundation stronger than any alliance." Applause rippled through the hall, hesitant at first, then stronger as more and more hands joined in. It was not the polite applause of high society, but the genuine kind that came from admiration. For once, they were not clapping for wealth, but for courage. Maya, embarrassed, buried her face against her father's side. Elliot bent his head slightly, allowing himself a rare smile as he whispered, "The world applauds you, little one. Stand tall. You've earned it." The ceremony was over. Servants began ushering guests toward the exits, but instead of leaving with idle gossip, they carried away whispers of scandal and the name of a girl who had dared to speak out when no one else did. By morning, every paper in the city would print the story. Headlines would scream of the poisoned wedding, of betrayal within aristocracy, and of the little girl who stopped it all. But within the Granger household, there was no concern for headlines. Later that evening, father and daughter sat together in Elliot's study, the fire crackling in the hearth, throwing warm light over the leather-bound books and gilded frames. For years, Elliot's study had been a fortress of business, a place where deals were struck and strategies laid out. Tonight, however, it was a place of healing. Maya curled up in a chair opposite him, her small hands wrapped around a mug of cocoa. She looked tired, her eyelids heavy, but there was also peace in her expression. Elliot watched her in silence, his heart heavy with regret. How many moments had he missed? How many times had he dismissed her voice as a child's chatter, when in truth, her instincts had proven sharper than the whispers of all his advisors combined? "Papa?" she asked softly, breaking his thoughts. "Yes, Maya. Will they try to hurt us again?" Her voice trembled with the fear of a child who had seen too much. Elliot stood and crossed the room, kneeling beside her chair. He brushed a strand of hair from her face and said, "They may try, my love. But they will never succeed, not as long as I have you by my side. You've shown me today that no danger is greater than the power of truth and courage." Maya smiled faintly, leaning against his shoulder. For the first time in a long while, Elliot felt something he had nearly forgotten existed within him, peace. Not the kind that came from wealth or security, but the kind that came from love, the kind he had found in his daughter's voice. That night, as the estate quieted and the scandal echoed beyond its walls, Elliot knew his life had been altered forever. The wedding was ruined, yes, and the alliance shattered. But what had been exposed was far greater than deceit. He had been reminded of what truly mattered. Not riches. Not power. Not alliances sealed with poisoned gifts. But family. Truth. And the courage of a little girl who had dared to speak when the world wished her silent. And from that day forward, Elliot Granger vowed never to let his daughter's voice go unheard again.